Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world watching this webinar on fostering innovation and sustainable finance in Japan. It's a webinar we're doing in association with the Japan Securities Dealers Association, and I'm very, very delighted to be hosting it. This evening we have a fantastic panel, and I should say a fascinating subject that we at the FT in Tokyo are constantly covering as news, as the as a sort of global turmoil in markets and the effects of the pandemic impact in so many different ways the question of Japan's future as a international financial hub, as a center for fintech and for financial innovation of many different varieties. This afternoon, the governor of Tokyo, Yuriko Koike, was talking about this very subject in the Nikkei newspaper this morning. The CEO of the Tokyo Stock Exchange was talking about the possibilities of giving a cautious welcome to activism. It's all moving very quickly, and we have a wonderful panel just ahead of us to discuss the very many issues that this all throws up. It's a delight to have you all here watching virtually. I've got a few bits of housekeeping. One is that at the end of the panel, we'll give about 10 minutes, I hope, to questions from the audience. I gather there's a great deal of you watching out there. You can use the tools to send in questions, and we'll try and filter a few of those through as best we can at the end. If you feel like going on social media to chat about the issues raised here, that's hashtag FT Finance Japan, where you can share your thoughts. But before any of this, I'm delighted to say that we've got a short pre-recorded message from Mr. Toshio Morita, who's the CEO and chairman of the JSDA. So here is Mr. Morita.
Thank you all for gathering virtually for this event. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all. It is well known that Japan has remarkably strong foundations as an investment destination and financial hub. It is the third largest economy in the world, with more than $18 trillion worth of personal financial assets, as well as a safe and convenient living environment, blessed with rich soils on which capital can grow. On top of this, however, Japan has also actively undertaken important initiatives for developing sustainable finance, including transition finance, as well as dynamic reforms to make the markets even more attractive. Japan has also begun introducing wide-ranging support measures for overseas firms to start financial businesses in Japan, thereby proactively enriching the already attractive soil of its capital market and planting the seeds for further growth. Japan's potential is clear. Today, our prominent speakers will discuss how these seeds can bear fruit, how Japan is trying to realize a net zero society, what the prospects of its economy and markets are, and what transformation you can expect to see for the future of this country. We hope that this event will give you all an opportunity to rediscover Japan's further potential as an international financial hub and investment choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marita-san, for that message. And I'm delighted to say that we are now ready to get on with our panel. And just to mention again that for those of you that you'll be able to watch this recorded version of this will remain online for some weeks after the event itself, so you can always come back to this. Wonderful. Right, my panel. So we have, I'm delighted to say, we have Tomoko Amaya, the Vice Minister for International Affairs at the Financial Services Agency. We have Anil Kashyap, Professor at the Stevens Distinguished Service Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and he's speaking in a personal capacity as a faculty member there this evening. And Yasunori Iwanaga, the Chief Responsible Investment Officer at Amundi Asset Management. And I'm hoping that our panel can start perhaps with Amaya-san. Perhaps you could start, please, by giving us a sense of what you think Tokyo as a financial center, and I suppose more generally Japan as the kind of the great the world's third biggest economy and the home of Tokyo. What is it getting right, and what do you think it might be getting wrong or doing too slowly? Amaya-san.
Well, maybe it is somewhat embarrassing for me to say that we are getting something right or wrong, but in any case, well, I'd like to lay out what we are doing in terms of the market. Well, we put emphasis on, we continue to put emphasis on the strong engagement between investors and companies through, for example, introduction and a series of revision of corporate governance code, introduction of stewardship codes, and promoting the enhanced disclosures and so on. So promoting the enhanced investor and company engagement is one of the theme for us. And also we are working on the promotion of Tokyo as an international financial center, as you know. And we are well aware that language barrier is one of the important aspects to make Tokyo as an attractive place for financial firms. Therefore, we introduce and we promote the disclosure in English by companies. And also we established the office where we can provide and handle all the applications in English and provide one-stop services for foreign firms which are interested in Japanese markets. So that's the second area. And thirdly, we are, under the current environment, we are taking various measures to promote Japan as a sustainable finance center. So those are the areas we are working on. And so what is getting wrong? Yes, it's very embarrassing for me to answer, but yes, as you say, I am well aware of the fact that lack of agility is sometimes weakness of Japan. Yes, I'm very aware of it. So let me stop here.
Well, yes. Well, I just want to pick you up on that last part. Amaya-san, do you think that? I mean, I know that you're going to say yes, but do you think that things are moving more quickly now than they were, say, 5 years ago? I mean, you mentioned the corporate governance code. That was nearly 7 years ago now. there's still a sense that although things were moving more quickly after that, that they're still moving slowly. Why do you think that's the case? Where are the big holdups?
Well, maybe in terms of the corporate governance code, yes, things are moving, but I would say that corporate governance is not a matter of corporate structure or I would say numbers of directors and so on. But the real issue regarding the corporate governance code or corporate governance is the behavior and the mindsets of management and companies. So those are the not things which can be changed overnight, a few days after the introduction of the corporate governance codes. So it should take some time to make changes. But as I said before, that we are encouraging the interaction and the engagement between companies and investors. For example, in order to encourage rich disclosure by companies to contribute dialogue between companies and investors, we convene study group by investors, analysts, as well as issuers, and regularly publish a sort of compilation of good examples of narrative disclosures. So those are the efforts we are making in order to encourage good communication and good engagement between companies and investors. We cannot change the mindset overnight, but we are progressing, I think.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, well, Professor Kashyap, could I ask you to come in at this point with the same question, but I'm also with an emphasis, I think, just on the importance that you attach to human capital in financial centers, and therefore, what do you think Tokyo is getting right and wrong in respect of attracting that, retaining that, nurturing it, and so on?
Okay, well, let me put that third. I was going to mention three things. So the first thing that Tokyo's getting right is its time zone. It's quite clear that I think global markets are going to need somebody operating 24 hours a day. And I think, there'll be someplace in Europe, there'll be someplace in North America or South America, and then there'll be someplace in Asia. So Tokyo I see as being in a cage match essentially with Singapore and then whatever happens in China. And that's who they have to keep in front of. Judged that way, the things that I think Japan are doing quite well are some aspects of the stability that you need for global financial markets. The legal system in Japan is solid. It's reliable. Nobody doubts that, there's not corruption. You don't get these kind of rulings out of nowhere or arbitrary laws passed that nobody is sure what they mean. And the drive towards having more in English is also very, very important. So those parts of stability are going quite well. There's broader stability issues regarding the macroeconomy and the structure of the financial system that matter a lot as well. And there, I think Japan still hasn't really emerged from this long, stagnation. The level of debt is high. At some point, the level of debt will be so high that the marginal person buying it will have to be a foreigner because the debt will exceed the total savings of Japan, and that could be a moment of reckoning. So I'd like to see more progress on getting the budget in a more sustainable sense. And then right now, central banks everywhere in the world have a huge, huge footprint in the financial markets. The BOJ has maybe got the biggest footprint. And ultimately, the central banks are going to have to withdraw, and we've got to get back more to price signals driving decisions. And so Japan needs to manage that transition as well. I can say more about human capital, but I think it might be interesting to wait and bring that in a second round after we we talk about these things, because those things are all precursors to me for Japan emerging as the dominant place in Asia that financial markets will operate through.
Professor, do you agree with what Amaya-san said about a sort of a mindset change as much as it is a set of practical or changes in framework and guidelines and so on?
Yeah, I think that is true, but it might also take a change in players in terms of who's going to come. So I'll answer your human capital question now then. I mean, for a financial center to really be global, you have to have world-class firms there. You have to have the best in the world at some things operating there, and that takes the best set of people. And so for a period, like in the late 80s and early 90s, Japan was the place to be. And people from all over the world were sending their best and brightest there. That's not been true for a long time. Japan's kind of stagnated in that front. And if you ask yourself, what's the best, the best 5 global Japanese-based firms that are headquartered in Tokyo or running major operations in Tokyo, that to me is an open question. Japan needs to build that competence up so that people see it as being comparable to, say, London or New York or any other place in the world where you say, wow, if I want to go and be excellent in this domain, that's where I want to be. And I know if I start out in one company and I need to move to another, there'll be others there. That's part of the mindset, that it's okay to start one company and move. It's okay to have a company fail. And you view it like the Silicon Valley, where failure is viewed as a badge of experience rather than a badge of failure. So all of that will take time to change. It's moving a little bit, but I think that's super important.
Thank you. And Iwanaga-san, talking of world-class companies, Amundi Asset Management. Iwanaga-san, please, can you give your sense of what Tokyo is getting right and wrong at this point? Particular emphasis, please, on picking up on what the professor said there, an emphasis on how things are perceived from the outside, and perhaps how, when you're dealing with your colleagues in Paris and elsewhere in the world, how they view Japan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, Amundi has about 1.8 trillion euro under management, and we're under with 6 investment hubs, and Tokyo is one of them. And so we have a sort of a holistic view about the markets across the across the boundaries. And well, Japan is seen as as a sort of gradually changing. In particular, like Amaya-san has said, we are seeing the changing of mindsets amongst corporate executives. And in the recent past, Amundi Japan has conducted survey with investee companies about the how they sort of evaluate Amundi Japan's engagement activities. And their response was very sort of positive, and so they began seeing the sort of the virtue of having conversation with investors, and so they sort of slowly but steadily sort of seeing the light of having the right conversation, and so that they can make the sort of business sustainable. And sort of people in outside Japan has seen such a sort of a development, and in fact, it's actually in Paris. We recently began sort of managing French domestic equity, taking a similar approach to ours through sort of engagement, and try to sort of explore the economic returns long term. By sort of working together with the invested companies to make sure that management understand all those issues in financials as well as non-financial issues, in particular, the environment and social. So all in all, sort of these changes are taking place, which we sort of recognize. Then the question is, whether this momentum can continue. And sort of this is somehow related to sort of areas for improvement for Japanese corporates, which is about representation or voicing their views more. And yes, there are sort of many companies that have begun publishing integrated reports, but if you look at the contents, they are not really sort of compelling enough or persuasive enough to tell their stories about long-term views. And on that regard, we need to sort of work together with the invested companies and to make their businesses well understood, not just in Japan, but also outside Japan. That's how I sort of view the situation. But long story short, I think Japan is sort of heading to the right direction. And after having all those series of codes, I mean, structured codes for one, and corporate governance code, and starting from governance, then those code have incorporated the ENS and the latest stewardship code talks about the sustainability in many places. So at long last, I would say Japan has somehow caught up with a sort of a big global trend.
It's true that it caught up with those trends, but one of the things that's quite notable, I mean, Professor Kashat was saying earlier about how there was a period where everyone sent the best and brightest to Japan. I like to think that the Financial Times is still doing that, but there you go. The fact is that at that time, if you looked at the rankings of the top 30, 50 biggest companies in the world by market cap, a really very high proportion of those were Japanese. We now know that that is no longer the case. That the largest Japanese company, Toyota, I think features perhaps in the top 30 or 40 biggest companies in the world, but then you're outside the list with all the rest of corporate Japan. Does it mean that you have to be big to be effective and to be noticed as a financial center, and for these things that you're talking about, Iranaga-san, for them to count globally? Do you really have to is it just a matter of scale?
No, I don't think so. Given this sort of VUCA world, you have to be nimble. And sometimes you have to be sort of agile enough to sort of change your tack, understanding sort of changing trends. And well, we should sort of probably sort of think more about how many startup companies are emerging in one market. And on that regard, Japan probably needs more of a changeover of market participants. Some are sort of too old or too big to change, and whereas sort of we've seen the sort of startup companies trying to sort of figure out the build up their business, but they are facing the financing constraints, and we probably need some sort of a better system to help them out, help them grow, to drive the sort of innovations for to explore the to define and define the new markets. That's how I view.
Professor, would you like to come back on that one? Sorry, Professor on mute. Sorry.
I think it's helpful to make a dichotomy between what has to happen in the operating companies that are based in Japan versus what would have to happen for Tokyo to be a global financial center. There's no reason why Tokyo can't be the providing all the financial services for all of Asia, even if its own companies are not that dominant. I mean, London has had a very good run. It's not as if there's, hundreds and hundreds of big operating companies in London. It was true that part of the reason people were there in the late 80s and early 90s was the Japanese economy was going really well. But there was a financial crisis in Japan. There were other problems in the economy. People moved out. But I don't think it has to be the case that Tokyo's future as a financial center is anchored on just the size of the operating companies and the GDP. I mean, it could still be the best place to run all kinds of innovative financial services businesses, and they should, the financial services agency and everybody else should be aspiring to that. They shouldn't have as a speed limit the ability of the manufacturing sector or other parts of Japan. You could have a bunch of great financial services companies, even if the rest of the economy grows just at an average pace from where it is now.
Yes. Amaya-san, I'd like to bring you back in as well, because actually looking at a couple of the questions from the audience that we'll get to a little bit later, but just thematically, one of the criticisms, I suppose, of Japan, of Japan's welcome or lack of it to as a financial center has been that a lot of the regulation and so on appears loaded against a certain style of capitalism, and I suppose when the Foreign Exchange Act was being revised, there was an idea that this was aimed at making life more difficult for activists, and I suppose that there's similar ideas about some of the talks about national security and so on. Do you think that the job of the FSA is to push for this kind of opening up of Japan, to make it more attractive? Is that how you perceive the role of the FSA, and how are you going to measure your success?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first, maybe before coming to your question, I just would like to say that I cannot agree more with Iwanaga-san when he said that there's a lack of compelling story by companies, Japanese companies, because it is not only about Japanese companies, but I think maybe it is about policymakers as well, because in many cases, maybe Japanese tend to, well, explain the targets and plan only when we are sure that we can achieve and we can be successful. But some others tend to announce their target first and then consider how to achieve, how to accomplish it. So that's the different way of communication is sometimes be seen as a lack of good story or good plan or good targets. And I think that's the weakness of Japanese companies as well as Japanese policymakers, and we need to somehow, change our style. So sorry for saying this first. And coming back to Leo's questions about the success and about the regulation against investors and so on. Well, first of all, I think those, like the change of the Foreign Exchange Act and so on, are very, new regulations are very targeted ones, but there was a miscommunication between investors, especially foreign investors and Japanese policymakers, about the intent of the regulations and the detailed arrangement of the regulations. And we've been making effort to enhance and promote the communication between investors and other policymakers, and sometimes make necessary amendments. So in that sense, I think we've made making progress. JFSA is making progress.
Sorry, Iwanaga-san, do you think there are just too many listed Japanese companies?
I have to say yes. And probably, well, now we are seeing the sort of new TSC sort of classification system. And, but for some reason, people tend to see a sort of, it is a sort of kind of a hierarchical structure. It shouldn't be that way. So if a sort of a company have a sort of a strong will to stay in standard, so be it. And if the company is really growing, without sort of so much worrying about the sort of corporate governance requirements and others, then it should choose to go to growth. And the prime market should not be seen as the current first section of TSC. So that's a sort of this is a very important point. And at the end of the day, it takes a sort of a good purpose of the individual companies before they sort of continue maintaining the status of being listed. So listing takes a lots of time and effort, in particular communication of investors and others. Then the question is, okay, do all the companies really understand that? That's a sort of a big question to ask. And at the end of the day, as time passes, probably more companies should recognize the sort of those sort of a duty to perform being as a listed companies. And then it's either start to continue sort of building their sort of experience or improve their practice or behavior to remain as a sort of investable companies, or they sort of do something sort of different. And so probably I would say this is my personal view, but probably this is going to be a sort of inflection point for Japanese corporates to first start sort of changing their sort of behaviors.
But I mean, one of the comments that's often made by investors about Japan is that it's it does reward the stock picker, somebody who's prepared to spend the time at analyzing a great number of companies and making some decisions and so on. Just taking the whole theme a little bit sideways to sort of ESG and to other big kind of thematic areas of interest to global investors. I mean, those kind of investors need they don't necessarily have time to go through as many different Japanese companies as there are, many of which may have very strong ESG credentials. So,
Yep.
I mean, what can Japan do to, as it were, what do you think can be done to kind of promote the companies that are ahead of the pack in Japan, but are kind of hidden in this very big sea of companies, some of which are really difficult to see as investable by global funds?
Well, probably sort of one way is to sort of find the right partner in Japan, or to try to build a sort of strong enough sort of a local capability. And but another thing is, it probably boils down to disclosure at the end of the day, and probably disclosure in English. And so Japan is still so weak on that. Once the more companies start sort of disclosing or improves their transparency vis-a-vis their operation or business outcomes or their sort of practices around the E&S, then more people can sort of find it sort of easier to sort of pick and choose the right one. But at the moment, I would say the levels of information asymmetry is huge, especially so for the sort of investors outside Japan. And how do we sort of fill the gap? Well, we have a sort of additional sort of compliant or explain rules, like you sort of like you see in the corporate governance code for one, and probably given this on the back of the establishment of the ISSB, we will sort of we are going to see more of a standardization of the disclosure rules going forward, and probably sort of as the sort of rules are more sort of standardized, then companies to follow them. That should sort of help sort of alleviate the current situation going forward. And again, if investors find it sort of less costly to pick and choose the right levels of information about Japanese corporates, then they start sort of try find out the something sort of some corporates with a promising business models, and this will be the time for alpha players,
Right.
rather than sort of beta players.
Right. Professor, can I bring you in on the
Yeah.
same question?
Yeah, I have a little bit different perspective. I mean, first of all, going back to this idea that Japan can be a financial center even without being tethered to the Japanese economy. I mean, most of the problems around ESG are kind of international in scope. I mean, there's the standards everywhere are difficult. The transparency everywhere is difficult. Greenwashing is a problem everywhere. So the way I think Japan can get out in front on this is, first of all, have the best standards, insist on transparency, but have very clear rules for what counts as something that can be marketed as ESG if it's run out of Tokyo, and try to become the place that if you want to buy exposure to ESG in Asia, you buy it out of Japan, because if it's produced out of Japan, it's going to be the most reliable and least subject to manipulation and fraud. So that would be an example of where they could get in and try to say, look, we're going to have a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. We're not going to let people just label stuff and call it at ESG and feel good, and everybody can say they're green and blah, blah, blah. Try to go down that route and say, look, if you want to do ESG in Asia, Japan is the place to do it, because you can count on getting something that really is E or S or G, and not something that's just a bunch of, marketing. So I don't think it's got to be just about Japan. You could probably get from many other Asian countries where, if you think the problems are big in Japan, think about, Thailand, Malaysia, Korea, all these other countries have all the same things. If everybody who wanted to market ESG to the world thought Tokyo was the platform to do it from, that would be the way to really take the lead in this domain.
Yes. I mean, actually, sorry, Amaya-san, one of the things that we hadn't mentioned, the FSA, and I suppose, Japan in general, was for a moment around about 2016, leading the world really in terms of financial regulation of crypto. It was the first country, I think, to recognize cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin as currencies. It came up quite early with a framework. I think it was probably the earliest large economy to come up with a framework for regulating exchanges. I mean, it had a couple of disasters before that happened, but that's how you learn. I mean, this is a question for Amaya-san. In terms of jumping on the kind of the big themes that are right at the front of that kind of innovation, does it really take? Do you have to have a prime minister who's definitely all for this, or can the FSA generate that momentum itself? I mean, do you feel like this is that you work for a part of government that really wants to embrace this kind of innovation?
Yes, as you said, that when we introduced immediately before the introduction of new regulation, there is a few scandals. So that motivated us to introduce new regulations. But at the same time, we were aware of the fact that we should not hinder the innovation, because innovation is important. So I think, it is basically the initiative by JFSA, and we balance the importance of innovation and the importance of regulation as well. And I think it was successful, and it has been successful. I think recently many markets now suffered from the, a big change, fluctuating crypto asset market and associated the instability, instability of the market, or some suffered from the investor protection programs and so on. And in that sense, I think we have been successful to introduce a sort of holistic framework for crypto asset a few years ago without hindering innovation too much.
Yes. We've got some great questions from the audience, but just before I get to those, I just wanted to just ask as well, because it'll be something that I'm sure everyone will have a view on, which is we haven't mentioned the pandemic and the effect that has had. We know that it's having, for the time being and for the last couple of years, it's had a big impact on physically the number of foreigners that can come into Japan. Foreigners that you would definitely say would be critical to the growth of anywhere as a financial center, but that's also affecting Hong Kong and elsewhere. I guess the question I wanted to ask all of you really is whether you imagine that a post-pandemic financial center is going to look terribly different from a pre-pandemic financial center. Do you think we're on the brink of some very substantial change to the way that financial centers are viewed around the world? And does Japan stand particularly to gain or lose from that? Professor, perhaps you first with that.
Well, I mean, I think financial centers have to evolve or die. I mean, there's always going to be technological forces and innovation just in the product mix and all of that force you to be agile. I mean, I think the pandemic shock, may matter on the margin. Maybe people want to work from home a little bit more. It wouldn't be comfortable to work in Tokyo if you didn't have to be 20 minutes from the office. If you could be 40 minutes from the office because a couple days a week you don't come in. But I think there's a lot of agglomeration that happens in financial services. It's not an accident that the financial services are being the most aggressive about trying to get their people back into the office. So I think, largely the forces that were going to drive whether or not you could be a successful financial center 5 years ago are probably the same as they are now and will be in the next 5 years. I mean, it's getting all the human capital, the legal and political and economic stability up and going, having a solid regulatory framework. I think those things are the first order things.
Yes. Thank you. We've got a great question here that I think Iwanaga-san might be well equipped to answer, which is, what is your opinion on the ESG rating of Japanese companies by ESG rating providers? Is Japan at a disadvantage compared with other countries?
Well, first off, there are sort of different legal systems, in particular, when it comes to this sort of governance. And Japanese corporates have somehow sort of unique sort of setup, when you compare it with others, like corporate director and corporate auditor relationship. And from outside, audit committees, auditor system in Japan doesn't seem strong enough to control the put the effective control onto executives. That's a sort of part of the reason Japanese corporates tend to receive a lower G rating in our experience, whereas ENS it's probably sort of more related on the levels disclosure going forward. In particular, all those prime listed companies are supposed to sort of disclose their corporate climate risks or strategy in accordance with the TCFD recommendation, and it is still in a sort of work in progress for many of Japanese corporates. So going forward, probably so transparency and more of transparency on S will be the sort of key. In particular, human capital, and the human capital is the area that few companies have consciously generated data or collected data. So when it comes to disclosing something, they have sort of nothing much to say. So this is really a problem. And but on the other hand, the new corporate governance code asks corporates to disclose how they sort of put the their sort of measures or sort of strategies to develop their human capital, so retain talent in light of their business continuity sustainability. So that'll be another key areas for many Japanese corporates.
Thank you. We've only got a few minutes left. We've got a couple of questions. First one for Amaya-san, specifically for Amaya-san, which is how will Japan encourage global investment opportunities in Japan's medium-sized listed companies? Though that huge, great area of Japan, of listed Japan.
Well, it's very interesting question because yes, for the medium-sized companies, but I think even medium-sized companies, they need to improve the transparency, especially transparency in English. And fortunately or not, many Japanese companies has chosen prime market when Tokyo Stock Exchange decided to reorganize it itself. And there are more than 1,000 Japanese companies listed in prime market in April. And those companies who are listed on prime market should, promote the disclosures in English, and also they should introduce electronic voting platforms and so on. So, being a part of prime market urge them to establish good communication strategy and enhance their English disclosure inevitably. Yes. So I think that would work.
Thank you. Yes. Professor, I think this last question for you, which is, it's an enormous question, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to answer concisely, which is a very legitimate question we haven't covered really, which is whether Japan's maturing population, its aging population, its shrinking workforce is influencing its financial models and affecting its innovation. I'm sure that the answer is yes, but I wonder if you could get some sense of how and whether any of that's reversible.
I'm not sure it is, because the financial sector doesn't have to have that many dynamic people to necessarily make it run. So I think it's probably hurting just the fact that the number of young people is shrinking, and that's probably important. But I don't think it's deterministic. If I was trying to reboot Japan's chances as a global financial center, I'd go out and run a survey saying, look, Singapore is our competition. China's got really bad fundamentals on certain dimensions. Let us find out the 5 things that Singapore is doing better that we aren't, and then concentrate on those things and try to work down that list of problems to say we're going to overtake them, because we're going to make a determination that we're going to get rid of all the roadblocks. We're going to set high standards. We're going to do all of that. And I think you can do that even with the population dynamics and everything else, if you make it if you make it a goal.
Yes. Well, with that, I regret to say that we've run out of time, which is a disaster, because I really felt that we were only just getting going. But that is the fact that I feel like that is in 100% thanks to our wonderful panel, who I would like to join our audience in thanking very much for the time that you've given us today. So that was Tomoko Amaya, Anil Kashyap, and Yasunori Iwanaga. You've been a wonderful panel, and I'm very, very grateful to you all for taking your time, and to our audience for the wonderful questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to have time for more of them, but do continue the debate online, and we will continue, I promise you, to cover Tokyo's markets and its innovation at the FT here in Tokyo. So thank you so very much, all of my panel, and to my audience, and to the Japan Securities Dealers Association for helping to host this webinar. Thank you very, very much, one and all.
Thank you.